My name's Lowell. I've been involved in energy-based medicine and psychotherapy for in the region of 30 years. I was born in Iran. My father was Dutch, so I have a mixture of, let's say, the Orient and the Western. I moved to the UK when I was very young. I went to school, had got my education in the UK, and then moved to Germany and lived there for the region of 40 years. And then have moved to the UK about 8 years ago, where I've been working in a private practice with the principles of psychotherapy and energy-based medicine. I started my journey as a therapist about 30 years ago. Initially studying psychotherapy, but a very specific form of psychotherapy that was developed by an Austrian psychoanalyst, Wilhelm Reich, who was a student and a contemporary of Freud. And Reich worked quite differently as a psychoanalyst. In those days, a psychoanalyst would only listen to the client, would not even look at the client. And the difference is with Reich, he started to engage with them more, and he looked at their breath, he looked at the way they would move, he would pay attention to the tone of their voice, he would look at their eyes, the eye contact, and with that he started to work much more with the body. And I would say he's actually the father of all forms of body-oriented psychotherapy. He was the initiator of it. And he realized that if you make a change within the body, and especially the breathing, you can release a conflict, or you can create a change within the mind. And conversely, if you change or address a psychodynamic, a dynamic where there's a conflict in the thought processes or the emotions, you will then have a change taking place in the body. And often we block expression, emotional expression, by tightening up the muscles, by holding our breath, by contracting. And by releasing these tensions within the body, we start to release the tensions, or let's say the hidden, the held back emotions can be released. So it was really my first move to understand that there is an energy flow within the body which has a relationship to the mind and the emotions, and vice versa. And I work strongly on those basic principles to say that we don't have just one body, but we have three different levels of expression. One being the physical body with its energetic counterpart, which today we use often as the electromagnetic field of the body, which every cell produces. And then also we have an emotional body where we perceive our feelings, and we have a mental body with which we think. And the physical body per se is an expression of these underlying energies. So if we have a thought, as an example, I would like to have a cup of tea, the physical body responds to this thought process, gets up and goes to the kitchen, let's say, and makes a cup of tea. The same with the emotions. If we have an emotion, we might feel grief, we might feel anger. The physical body then responds to this energy and ideally will give it expression. We'll express our anger, we'll express our grief, we'll express deeper feelings. And in this way, the energy of, let's say, grief or anger is dissipated, is discharged through the expression in the physical body. And then on the physical plane, the energetic plane, we can have toxins, we have viruses, bacteria, and all the different modalities that we're aware of. What's very important is that if we have, let's say, have a belief system that we've learned as a child, which could be, for example, it's not good to express your anger, then when we do feel anger, when someone does something to us which justifies an angry response, we try to block that energy. And we block it by contracting our muscles, by holding back the impulse to maybe verbalize. We hold our breath. And if this continues often, which is usually the case when we're in a family situation, then it happens again and again and again, and these dynamics become frozen within us. So even as adults, we have a difficulty, let's say, to express anger, or we have the difficulty to express our grief. And this creates the various tensions in the physical body, which prevents the energy from flowing freely. And if energy doesn't flow freely, it will start to stagnate, it will become negative. Very simply like a river, as long as it's flowing, the water is pure, it's energized. But the minute it gets stopped and stagnates, that's where we see the development of parasites and bacteria and so on. And the body has exactly the same form of dynamics. So if the energy is not flowing, it turns to what Reich would term deadly orgone, and which he would say was an energy which was conducive to illness. So if, let's say, we've contracted the muscles in our abdomen in order not to express our feelings, that area will start to have a lack of energy. Where there's a lack of energy in the abdomen, we're going to find that that's where we get viruses, parasites, bacteria. And often, if we don't release that tension, then a lot of the therapies we do don't take hold. And so the work I do is really to look at these dynamics, look at the psychodynamics, look at the emotional components. I delve a little bit into the history, but I don't want to get stuck in there, as I prefer to work with what is presently happening and not really the past. As children, we develop our particular patterns. These patterns then just get repeated until they become fixed within us. And the trouble is even as adults, we're repeating these patterns. And for me, it's important to identify the patterns that we're repeating and then to dissolve them in the here and now. Once we manage to dissolve them, then the energy becomes free again, the flow takes place in the body, and there's relief in the mind. And that way the healing can take place. And I work strongly with Neomed because their speciality is not only working on the physical level, but it's also looking strongly at the energetic dynamics and using equipment, energy-based equipment, which supports the flow and the release of energies within, and the harmonization of energies within the physical body. So it's a great combination to work on the physical level and with its energetic counterpart, but now also to take into consideration the emotional and the psychological dynamics. If we have a mental belief system that prevents us from expressing ourselves, energy is caught up in that conflict which is in the mind. We need energy to uphold that dynamic. The same goes for the emotional. If we have an emotional, let's say an emotional conflict, or what we could term as an emotional toxin, very similar to having a physical toxin, we can have an emotional toxin, which is very simply an emotion which we have not really been able to deal with as a child for whatever reason. It could be through trauma, it could be through our conditioning, through our upbringing. We need energy to hold that emotional toxin in place. And on a physical level, we have again the very similar process. If our body is not managing to release toxins or bacteria or pathogens, it will then store that toxin somewhere in the body, and very often in the connective tissue or within the fat. But that costs the body again energy. So what we look at, or what I look at specifically, is to address these different levels. So I see that if I can resolve and identify and then resolve a psychological conflict, that releases energy. When that energy is released, the overall organism suddenly has more energy at its disposal, and it will take that energy and maybe deal with an emotional conflict or a physical conflict. And the same goes for an emotional. On the emotional level, let's say there's an emotional toxin which has not been, we haven't been able to deal with or release as children. When that's addressed, when it's looked at and resolved, suddenly energy is free. The organism will breathe and expand in its dynamics. And again, we have more energy at our disposal than to process the healing, let's say, on a physical level. So the work, it's, even though we have specific methods of working with different illnesses, let's say a Lyme disease or an eating disorder, where there's very specific conflicts that can take place, it is a matter of working very individually. It's a matter of identifying where the underlying disturbances are on all levels and helping to release those and to resolve the conflicts. It's possible that we even have a psychological dynamic which prevents us from healing. And I've seen this in many chronic cases. Even the belief system that I'm not going to get better, I can get better, actually prevents us getting better. And once we can identify these and resolve them, then we open a door where the treatments that are being given, whether it's physical, emotional, psychological, will suddenly take hold. And because there's no longer the psychological counter dynamic which is holding back healing, the healing process. And in this way, I would say it's the primary, often when there's chronic illnesses, as I say, what happens is that these two sides start to work against each other. When we've gone through a lot of processes, when we've been through many different practitioners, when we've tried many different forms, we become disheartened, and whether we realize it or not, the subconscious plays a major role. And the subconscious can sabotage, it can prevent healing, and that's what we need to resolve. Also, a lot of our older childhood dynamics can also prevent us from healing. We might have a childhood dynamic, as a very simple example, let's say we received the love that we were getting from our parents only when we were ill. We'll create an illness, we'll hold on to the illness because that's the way we're going to get the support or the love we want. And these psychological patterns or dynamics, when they're repeated throughout many, many years, they become fixed in the subconscious. And we lose the connection to what's happening in the subconscious. And in actual fact, they say that 95% of our actions are driven by the subconscious levels. And a major part of the work on the emotional psychological is to make the subconscious conscious. The minute we become conscious of our subconscious dynamics, we can resolve them because they're open in plain sight. They can no longer be driving our decisions, our relationships from a deeper level. And again, that will start to set the energy free. And I would say that's a very major aspect within chronic illness, that it's not just the physical, but it's the underlying emotional and psychological dynamics which are very often driving the physical level. As I said at the very beginning, the physical body is just an expression of the energy within it. So it's an expression of the psychological, mental energy, it's an expression of the emotional energy, and it's an expression of the energetic levels. What I've also come to realize through the years of work is the body has a very specific dynamic of how it deals with its problems. And using the methods that I use, which is the emotional mental patterning, but also the energetic patterning, we start to create a dialogue with the body. And through that dialogue, we start to understand what does the body want in this particular moment. And that way we can very clearly give the very particular treatment that the body is calling for in that moment. Sometimes the body is calling for a detoxification. Sometimes it's looking for different nutrients. Sometimes it's looking for support of particular organs. Sometimes it's looking for more support emotionally. And if we can engage in that dialogue and we offer the treatments in the very particular direction which the body is dictating, then we start to see a lot of success taking place. And what I've seen is that in a lot of chronic cases which don't get better is the treatments are given, but they're given in the wrong direction. And sometimes doing a detoxification, when let's say the liver, the kidneys, the detoxification organs are not ready, we're going to have a bigger problem. We suddenly flood the body with more toxicity, the body can't take it, and it goes into, it becomes counterproductive. Yet if we're doing it at the very rate and direction following the body's dynamics, we start to see chronic illnesses unfolding a lot quicker. So the way I would say that I work is really addressing all these different levels at the same time, but my emphasis really is psychological, emotional, which is, let's say, my passion. I've worked in a psychiatric clinic for 10 years in Germany. If we have a look at how the patterns can affect us negatively, in many ways, as I've explained, if we have a deep inner conflict, which is maybe self-depreciatory, which doesn't believe that healing is possible, that has had a journey of lack of success in a chronic case, all of these beliefs, all of these experiences can be a massive hindrance. Also, the experiences we've had as children, the patterns we've gained, the emotional, what I call emotional toxicity, the traumas, all of these patterns can be stored in the body, and then they can hold back or prevent healing to take place. Conversely, the thoughts, the emotions can affect us in a positive way. If we believe in our healing, we'll set free a lot of endorphins. It will affect our hormone system. It'll affect our organs. So if we wake up in the morning, we're feeling positive, we're feeling bright, that opens up our energy. One principle which was very foundational for me, which Wilhelm Reich talked about, he suggested that every living organism is in a constant state of expansion and contraction. And in an ideal situation, our physical, our emotional, our mental, psychological bodies will be in the state of expansion and contraction. We can expand into joy, we can expand into happiness, we can expand into love, but we can also contract if need be, if we're in a state of fear or if we're in grief. Our organism has this ability. And Reich did a very interesting experiment where he looked at amoeba under the microscope, and he saw this dynamic that they would expand to a maximum, and then there would be a discharge of energy and they would contract again fully. And what he did is he started to prick the amoeba with a pin, and he really saw that the minute he pricks it with a pin, it immediately contracts to this negative influence from the environment. But within time, the amoeba would again expand, and it would then get back into the state of expansion and contraction. Yet when he did it often, the amoeba would contract and remain contracted. And a lot of his work was based on helping us to expand again, to help us expand within our mind and our thinking, to expand emotionally, and also strongly to expand physically. And by doing that, we come back to a state of health. We suddenly can expand and embrace the universe. We can expand and embrace our partners. We can expand and embrace joy of life. Our physical body can vibrate at a different level. It can open up to joy. It can contract as needed. And what's very fascinating from a physical level, we'll see that almost every organ is in a state of pulsation. If we look at the circulatory system, which is a primary system, we see that the heart is constantly expanding and contracting. And the more it can expand and the more it can contract, the greater scope it has, the greater power it has. If we look at the bladder, if we look at the lungs, they're all in a state of expansion and contraction. It's only when through life's experiences that we start to lose that ability to expand fully, that pulsation becomes less. And so with the work that we do here, or especially, let's say, the work I do on a psychological emotional dynamic, is to help one to come back into that state of expansion and contraction. And I would say a lot of the work that Neomet does is, again, to look on the physical level. How can we support energetically, physically, the expansion and contraction of the cells? Every cell that can expand fully, contract fully, can take in nutrients fully, can discharge toxicity fully, will be in a state of health. And again, we see this dynamic in taking in food, nourishing food, being able to break down the foods healthy, and then again being able to discharge the toxicity, the waste that's left in a healthy way, is again an expression of healthy expansion and contraction. And once we help the organism into that state where the digestion functions fully, where the intestines are in a state of pulsation, again, it's a flow, it's a movement. It's that when that pulsation is there, the body will be able to break down the foods in a healthy way. It'll be able to absorb the nutrients in a healthy way. It'll be able to discharge the toxicity and the waste products. And that way we overcome illnesses like diarrhea or the opposite, constipation. Again, there we see this expression of expansion and consciousness. When we're in a state of overcharge, we're going to be in a state of diarrhea. If we're in a state of sluggishness or contraction, we're going to have constipation. And all of these dynamics, also on a psychological level, will have a knock-on effect on the physical level. If we're holding back feelings, if we're holding back our sexuality, we're going to contract those muscles which are related to those expressions. And as I mentioned at the beginning, if we're holding back our feelings, we'll tend to contract the muscles in our stomach and in our abdomens. When we contract those muscles, all the organs in that area will not be in a state of pulsation. The intestines, the stomach, the colon will not be functioning. It can't function because the energy is simply not available. And again, once we resolve the psychological, emotional conflicts, suddenly we start to breathe deeper. We start to breathe in the abdomen again. When we breathe in the abdomen again, our emotions start to flow. We can express a freedom of emotions. And with that, we can expand our scope of emotions. We can expand into the sense of joy or the sense of, as I say, love. Whereas when there's this contraction, we tend to be more dampened down. We have less emotional capacity at our disposal. We can tend to be more in sadness or in anger or in grief. And so the work, again, is on these three levels: mental, emotional, physical with its energetic counterpart.